Hi there, this video I'm going to be talking to you about permitted development rights, and this is specifically explaining this for homeowners. And this is part one. What I'm going to be covering in this video, I'm going to be aiming to answer the questions for you. What is permitted development? When is it allowed? And when is it not allowed? If you have not met me before, hello, I'm Jane. I'm a chartered architect here in the UK. And I would love it if you would like and subscribe to my channel if you are interested in home design, information around home design, house extensions, optimizing the space that you already have, and if you work from home and you're interested in improving that situation as well. This video, I'm going to be going through this permitted development rights for householders technical guidance, which is not super exciting or fun, but I'm going to make it as clear and as simple to understand as possible. And I'm also going to pick out a few detailed rules from the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 and General Permitted Development England Order 2015 as amended. So these are what relate to permitted development. Now, permitted development was a sort of renewed legislation in 2019. It came in earlier. And what permitted development is, it is the right for homeowners to improve and extend your home without having to apply for planning permission. But with this right comes some responsibilities. So it's important that you understand what the limits are to these rights, and so that you can maximize your use of them. But you do have the responsibility to protect the interests of your neighbours and to protect the wider environment whilst you're making the most of your rights. It's commonly abbreviated permitted development as PD. So if you hear me say PD, that's what I mean, permitted development. You may see PD written around in places where people are talking about planning permission, and when they say PD, that is what they mean. They mean permitted development. PD may mean other things in abbreviated senses in other places. I don't know. If you know, you can keep that to yourself, or you can comment below with what else PD means. But in this situation, it's permitted development. Now, you do have the option, although you don't have to apply for planning permission in order to exercise your rights for permitted development, you can apply for like a formal recognition that what you're building is within permitted development rights. And that is by applying for this certificate of lawful development. Now, I haven't done this very many times because most of my clients actually want me to apply for planning permission, so we usually are not doing works within permitted development. But for some clients in the past, I remember one client in particular way back when permitted development was a relatively new thing, and I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was sometime around 2010, 2011, sometime then. And it was a relatively new thing, permitted development. And my clients at the time, they wanted to have this certificate of lawful development so that if they were to sell, they could present this, and it would, the hope was that it would make any sales of their home easier in future. And the thing was that the planning legislation is also impacted by case law, things that are happening in the courts. And so when we submitted this application for lawful development for their project, it included the demolition of this 1980s ramshackle conservatory that if you leant on it too hard, it probably would have fallen down. And that meant that during the process of us designing and submitting this application for this certificate, at the same time, there was a case in the courts brought by the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, and they were trying to stop permitted development rights allowing for demolition. And so what happened was we applied for this certificate of lawful development. Everything that we were applying for was within permitted development rights, but because as a result of this case, and it impacted on all the legislation, and the decision was that demolition was not allowed within permitted development, and that meant that we were not given the certificate of lawful development. My clients were furious with me, not fairly unjustifiably so, because it wasn't my fault. What we did was correct, just that the law changed in the middle of what we were doing. So there are some risks here, and these are some of the problems with the legislation. Legislation is continuously changing, and you need to keep up with it. So although this is stuff, what I'm talking about here is accurate right now, in a few years' time it may not be. What you need to know as well is what is development, because to know what's permitted, you need to know what development is. Development is defined, it's one of those terms that's defined in Section 55 of the Town and Country Planning Act in 1990. It's nice that it's defined, because often words are not defined. And what they've said is very loose, that development is basically anything that's built. Things that are done by builders, that's development. And they include structural alterations, construction, rebuilding, demolition, and subdivision of a building into 2 or more houses. And what it does not include are interior alterations, building that does not materially affect the external appearance, or a change in the primary use within the same use class. Now, I'm going to unpick some of these because they are not entirely clear. And I do want to reiterate that this video is only relevant for individual homes that have permitted development rights. This is not relevant for you if you're looking for information about a commercial property or some other kind of property. This is only relevant for houses. And this term, materially affect, it has no statutory definition. And that means that unlike development, which, okay, it has a definition, but as you can see, it's a fairly loose one, materially affect does not have a statutory definition. And therefore, it's one of those grey areas. And there are loads of these sorts of grey areas within planning legislation, which means that it can become down to the interpretation of different people who are dealing with your case. And that can make it a little bit more tricky to get permissions, get agreements about the same thing, because people come at things from different angles. But in terms of this, let me go through these different points and pick them out a bit more. Interior alterations have a lot of different meanings. So it could be like redecorating, you're painting, or building a built-in wardrobe or something like that. Those kind of internal alterations are not considered development. And even for planning terms, if you're removing a structural wall that is internal only and you can't see it from the outside, doesn't have any effect, then also from a planning point of view, that is not development. But some of these internal alterations, like removing a structural wall or making a new bathroom or a utility room or moving the kitchen, those things require building control, building regulations approval, because they are affecting the structural stability, and they're affecting ventilation and different kinds of services, health and safety impacts on you and people who use your building. So internal alterations, although it may not be relevant from a planning perspective, can be relevant still for other things. Also for party wall, if, for example, you were removing a chimney breast inside, and if that's on the party wall, then that is a structural alteration to a party wall, and it could affect it, and you do need to deal with Party Wall, the Party Wall Act, and follow the procedures for that. In terms of material effect, as I said, there's no statutory definition, so it can come down to some interpretation on that. And usually it means things like you're not massively changing the way it looks from the outside. But, if you're like repainting, if you've got timber windows and you're repainting them another colour, that is something that you're allowed to do. It's not something of a big impact for the external appearance, even if actually it does have quite a big impact on the external appearance. So yeah, it's a very grey area. And then what this primary use within the same use class means, so every type of building is classified and has a use class, and residential buildings are one type of use class, and there are so many. I'm not going to go into use classes in this video, but there are lots of different types of use classes. For example, education, shops, commercial, and light industrial. All these different sorts of buildings have different use classes. And if you're changing, if you're changing from a shop, this is not really relevant to homeowners, basically. If you're changing from a cheese shop to a clothes shop, it doesn't matter, it's still a shop. Pretty much that's what this means. If from a homeowner's perspective, it doesn't really make that much difference. And like I said, in terms of talking about the interior alterations, other permissions and consents do still apply. They are required, even if the work is within permitted development. You may still have to apply for building control approval. You do still have to follow any procedures for the Party Wall Act. And the Party Wall Act is not as fun as this image conveys. It's not all balloons and birthday cake. It's a little bit, it's that thing that means you're going to be having conversations with your neighbours. So it can be a little bit tricky and it can get a bit heated at times. So yeah, it's important to do that correctly and sensitively and follow the correct procedures to not get burnt. That's a completely different thing. Now, permitted development does not apply to houses that are created through permitted development change of use. So certain types of use classes, certain types of buildings that are classified in specific ways, you are allowed to change them from that classification to residential. And that includes shops, business like offices, some agricultural buildings, and various other property. So in certain situations, you are allowed to, within permitted development, change the use of those buildings into residential. And permitted development also does not apply to flats. It also does not apply to any houses that are subject to an Article 4 direction. And this is when local planning authority has removed permitted development rights. Typically, this applies to Article 2 land, and these are areas of outstanding natural beauty, national parks, conservation areas, World Heritage sites, all of these like special places where the local planning authority has said, look, this area is really special. We want to control any works that's taking place in this area to make sure that it's appropriate. And in those places, that permitted development right will be removed with an Article 4 direction. So if you're in any of those areas, you won't have, or you probably won't have permitted development rights. You'll need to check. And permitted development does also not apply to listed buildings and ancient monuments. And it also doesn't apply to houses that have already been extended to the maximum permitted development limit. So if you've bought a house and they've got the original floor footprint of the house, and then it's been extended to that maximum size that permitted development allows, then you can't do another extension of an equivalent maximum permitted development size on top of what's already there. That's not allowed. You can't do it. And I'm sorry if I've burst your bubble about not being able to extend Stonehenge, but yeah, not allowed either. So that's it. Thank you for watching. That's part 1. Please watch part 2. I'm going to go into the specific alterations that are allowed under permitted development, what you can do, where you can do it, how big you can do it, what materials, all of that detail I'm going to go into in the next video. I hope this is interesting. If you have any questions for me, if there's any topics that you would like me to cover in another video, please comment below and let me know what those topics are, and I will happily add them to my to-do list, video to-do list. Bye for now.